Hey everybody, welcome back to the Behaviour Revolution, and it's really exciting. We're going to conclude these supernatural feast videos today with this final video. I will do like a few prequel type videos about the Passover and the Pentecost in a few months when they're closer to coming around, fresh on our minds. But for now, let's tie up all these thoughts about the feasts and how they are a supernatural experience for us by firstly looking at the prophets and what the prophets said about these amazing feasts. Let's have a look. The books of restoration. There were 4 Old Blood Covenant books which essentially deal with the restoration of Israel in relation to the Feast of Tabernacles. These are the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, Haggai and Zechariah, and each deal with the restoration of the house of Judah from Babylon, both from the historical and prophetic point of view. They provide instructive material historically for the Jews and prophetically for the bridal fellowship. Our consideration includes that which took place historically and of course the supernatural moral lessons we may learn in the assembly today. All right, so it's talking about the restoration of, well, a lot of them didn't want to come back and they were divorced, but these prophets were talking about Judah coming back from Babylon. Let's look at it. Firstly, the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. This is a historical account. Under Solomon, Israel built the temple. Under Solomon, Israel built the temple of Yahuwah and saw the esteem of Yahuwah fill the same. There were 120 trumpeters and singers of one accord, making one sound in the time of dedication. So, in the early bridal fellowship, the book of Acts shows that the 120 disciples were in one place of one accord, and the esteem of Yahushua filled the new covenant temples of the fellowship. See the shadow and the fulfillment? During Israel's history and the successive leadership, the temple of Yahuwah became defiled by sin and idolatry. And in due time, the esteem of Yahuwah departed in such grand form. And so, likewise, it was in the history of the assembly. Over the years, sin, backsliding and apostasy crept in under its successive leadership, and finally the esteem of Yahushua left, bringing in the Dark Ages, almost 2,000 years of not much rain, not much harvest, nothing, not much of anything, not much truth either, until recent years. Once the esteem of Yahuwah departed from Solomon's temple, it came under judgment. How devastating would that have been? The grandest metropolis phenomenon on the earth. Destroyed. If any defile the temple of Yahuwah, they would be destroyed. Thus Yahuwah permitted his temple to be destroyed under Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon. He allowed his people to be carried captive to Babylon for 70 years. The assembly in the period known as the Dark Ages was also in its Babylonian captivity. The esteem of the early bridal fellowship was gone. The temple was defiled and thus destroyed. In due time, the captivity ended, and Yahuwah sent a message to Babylon that he wanted his people to come out of Babylon and return to the city of Yahuwah. It was a message of restoration. It was a message of restoration. Not everybody responded though, but there was a remnant that believed the message of restoration. Likewise, the call has come out to Yahushua's bride to come out of Babylon, come out from among them and be set apart. Come out of Babylon, come out of religious idolatry and confusion, come out of all the shadows and nonsense as well, and accept the message of deliverance. Yahushua wants to restore his house, restore his temple, his body. He wants to restore his assembly. That message is going out into the bride now. Assemble. Bride, assemble. Not all believe the message, but there are those who do and respond to it. When the remnant returned to Jerusalem, they began the work of restoration. They restored the altar of Yahuwah, the foundation of the temple, as well as the city and its walls. Much opposition was experienced, but in due time the work was completed. So, from the period of the Reformation, the work of restoration has been progressing quite slowly. Progressing in the bridal fellowship, the foundational principles have been recovered, and Yahusha's bodily temples are now being restored amidst great opposition from foes from within and without. Vitally connected with the restoration of the temple was the keeping of the feasts of Yahuwah again, in particular the Feast of Tabernacles. The main points worthy of attention in these chapters are all those of the returned remnant came out of their cities and gathered as one man to Jerusalem. All those of the returned remnant came out of their cities and gathered as one man to Jerusalem. There was great unity amongst the people. They all gathered as one before the water gate. Water speaks of the washing of the water by the word. The water gate was the gate where they brought the water from the pool of Siloam in the outpouring of the water at the altar in the Feast of Tabernacles. We're going to go into that a little bit later. So they were told to come out of their homes and gather together at Jerusalem. Now we are all the living temples. Where do we gather together? In Jerusalem. Where's the gathering of the little temples? The assembly. Wherever the assembly is, where two or more are gathered, I am there. That is the Jerusalem. And that is, all of us together globally one day will become New Jerusalem. Will be formed together. So isn't this amazing? The foundational principles of Yahusha's teachings are still being recovered and abstractly laid properly, away from men and women's religious agendas of cultural tradition, as the work of restoration progresses. And at the same time, the people of Yahusha can enjoy the feasts of Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. In Yahusha's appointed time, the temple is being completed. All the lively stones are being shaped and polished and shall be filled more and more with his esteem. That's the process you're going through if you're going through pain or flogging or chastisement, disciplining, goading, rebuking. That's all you being polished so that you can be fitted together. So coming together in an assembly is like a rehearsal. Practicing, getting along with people, practicing bouncing off people. How are you going to behave here? You're going to argue? You're going to let them have it? Are you going to take what they say personally? Make excuses for yourself? How are you going to react and respond to people and behave in the assembly? It's like a practice run, a dress rehearsal. Come together. All the lively stones are being shaped and polished. It is at this period of time, under Ezra, looking back at the shadow, at this period of time under Ezra and Nehemiah that we see the ministry of the prophets, Haggai and Zechariah. They also work with the people in the restoration of the temple and in connection with the feasts of Yahuwah, especially the Feast of Tabernacles. Why especially the Feast of Tabernacles? Why was that so important to them back then? Let's look. The books of Haggai and Zechariah. Firstly, the prophet Haggai. Now, a significant prophecy of Haggai is found in chapter 2. The time element is remarkable and links Haggai with the Feast of Tabernacles, as well as with the significance in his name. Haggai, in his prophecy, told the remnant, those that came back to build the temple again, he told them that Yahuwah was going to shake all things, shake the heavens, shake the earth, the sea, the dry land, and all the nations. He also said that the desire of all nations would come and fill the restored house with the esteem of Yahuwah. The great prophecy was that the esteem of the latter house shall be greater than the former. The house that comes later will be much better than the one that comes before it. And as we read Haggai 2, we discover that this prophecy was given on the 21st day of the 7th month. Does that date ring a bell? 7th month, 21st day. That is the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles proper. Remembering that the Feast of Booths lasted from the 15th to the 21st day of the 7th month, we see how the 21st day was the final day of this Feast of Tabernacles. When he's prophesying this, Haggai is saying this prophecy on this exact date. The 22nd or the following was to be a solemn assembly. Thus, the esteem of the later house is associated with the feast of the 7th month, the Feast of Tabernacles. The Jews would remember the esteem of the former house. A lot of them were sad because they were looking at this nice, but not as good as Solomon's temple. They were remembering the esteem of Solomon's temple and how the esteem of Yahuwah filled that house in the Feast of Tabernacles, the feast of the 7th month. That also happened. Solomon's dedication happened on Tabernacles as well. So, the esteem of the latter house would come in this 7th month. So both Solomon's temple and the restored temple are linked with the esteem of Yahuwah in the Feast of Tabernacles. See that? Both Solomon's temple and the restored temple that they were still doing in Jerusalem after their Babylonian captivity, it's all linked with the esteem of Yahuwah in the Feast of Tabernacles. It's all happening in the Tabernacles feast. A most remarkable link-up is seen in John 7 when Yahushua spoke out in Herod's temple at the Feast of Tabernacles. On the last day of the feast, Yahushua spoke of rivers of living water which were to flow from the innermost being of all who believed in him. This was around the same day that Haggai had ministered in the restored temple years before. And I'm going to go into this exact situation shortly. Of course, we've just looked at the shadows, so of course the application to us, the new bridal assembly, should be evident, should be obvious, for she is Yahushua's new house. Remember, he said the esteem, the glory of the later temple will be much better than the first one. Well, we are that later temple. We are the new house. She is still under restoration as yet. Yes, we can see that. We're all under restoration. We're all under reconstruction. Yahushua's people are not to be concerned about building their own sealed houses. This was an instruction given to them when they came back from Babylon. Don't be concerned about building your own houses. So likewise, the bride is not to be concerned about building their own sealed houses, their own homes or dwellings, or organizations. But we're to be concerned about the building of Yahushua's house, our temple, and also the assembly. As we look at the early bridal fellowship, the former house, we see the early esteem. But the last day bridal fellowship, the last house that Yahushua's now put the call out into the world to assemble, this last day bridal fellowship esteem is to have the greatest esteem revealed through experiencing the feast. We can only go up, can't we? Because there's basically nothing going on in the bride now. Where's the supernatural? Where's the miracles and wonders and signs? And they can't even come together about one issue. So all we can go is up. Yeah, the bar isn't very high, is it, to get better right now? So let's go for it. This is going to be a great day bridal fellowship, experiencing the feasts. As Solomon's temple was filled with esteem in this Feast of Tabernacles, and as Haggai spoke of the esteem of the later house in the Feast of Tabernacles, so both become shadows and prophetic of the esteem of the bridal assembly, the new covenant temple, and the Feast of Tabernacles experience, coming into the maturity of behavior. And we saw it happen from the day of Pentecost. In the book of Acts, we saw the whole book of Acts and all the writings that the disciples made, what was going on amongst them. And then they died and the assembly lost it through arguing, wouldn't come together. And then we've had almost 2,000 years of nothing much. And we are called to come back into this book of Acts experience in the assemblies once again, right before Yahushua returns. So that was the prophet Haggai. Wasn't that amazing shadows and fulfillments, speaking about the Feast of Tabernacles against the agricultural backdrop of Tabernacles? Let's look at the prophet Zechariah. Zechariah began his ministry about 2 months after Haggai. It's basically the same time. Both prophets were involved in the work of restoration, historically and prophetically. We have seen how Haggai ministered in conjunction with the Feast of Tabernacles. The prophet Zechariah also speaks of this same feast. The passage under consideration here is found in Zechariah 14. For natural Israel, under the old blood covenant times, there was the literal fulfillment. having a literal temple, a literal priesthood, literal animal sacrifices, literal altars in a literal city of a literal Jerusalem. Literally. But since Yahushua's ultimate blood sacrifice, the old covenant literalness is swallowed up in the victory, in the new covenant supernatural and abstract reality. Old blood covenant language is now abstractly discerned and interpreted, transformed, metamorphed through the torture stake of Yahushua through new blood covenant language. I don't care what you believe, the torture stake makes a difference to everything that went on in the covenant. The torture stake provided new blood, and that's the key here, new blood. Unlocking, making the instructions actually real and alive, and the love and discipline to actually want to do them as well. So, therefore, we draw from some of the main spiritual lessons from this passage in Zechariah, looking at first the natural, then the supernatural. Of course, look firstly at the natural, then look at the supernatural lesson. All nations were called upon to go up to Jerusalem to worship Yahuwah from year to year. As I said, where's Jerusalem now? It's where all the temples are gathered, the local assembly. Yahuwah was king in Jerusalem, the city of righteousness and peace. The believers out of every kindred, tongue, tribe, and nation now go into the spiritual and heavenly Jerusalem through a divine portal on the ark of their hearts. It is here that true worship takes place. Worship in spirit and in truth, and its manifested behaviors of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, trusting, gentleness, self-control, the fruits of behavior, fruits of warfare. Yahushua himself rejected worship at the earthly Jerusalem with its external forms. Of course he did. Who would want anything to do with that? The only worship that is acceptable to Yahushua now is that which is in spirit and in truth, through righteous, clean behavior, 24/7, not just on feast days. Fasting, afflicting the flesh and the being all day, every day, doing things his way, not your way. Yahushua Messiah is the king in heavenly Zion, heavenly Jerusalem. Earthly Jerusalem, where Yahushua was impaled, is now spiritually Sodom and Egypt, and is in bondage with her children, never to be of any use again. Never. It's written in many scriptures, Revelation, Galatians, all these places. He looks at that place as Sodom and Egypt. And what did he do to those places? What's he doing to Egypt in the Middle East today? That's how much the Middle East is irrelevant to his plan today. He's going to come back and one foot will go on the Mount of Olives and... Don't you have any eyes to see? Any spiritual discernment? It's got nothing to do. By the time he puts his foot on any part of this earth, it'll be frackled up. New heaven, new earth. So, cuckoo. All nations are called to keep the Feast of Tabernacles at Jerusalem. In other words, gather together, assemble as they worship the King. In order to do this, Israel had to follow Yahuwah's instruction, keeping Passover first, then Pentecost, and then Tabernacles. Experience in the first, third, and seventh months. Now in Yahushua's new blood covenant, the feasts are supernatural and can only be experienced and enjoyed in Messiah. In Messiah Yahushua as the only living Elohim. Not the Father, not Yahuwah, the Creator. It's Yahushua now. He is the new Elohim. There are no feasts outside of him. No feasts outside of Yahushua. Even though Jewry and her Messianic Nazarene daughters keep a form of the feasts today, a form of it, through its many lifeless, spiritless shadows. Even though they keep the lifeless, spiritless shadows, with no abstract discernment or understanding, no supernatural component, the Messianic Nazarene daughters of the Jews, makes you sick, doesn't it? They can't see. The nations who failed to respond and keep the Feast of Tabernacles have the rains of blessing. Those who failed have the rains of blessing withheld from their land. The rains were the seal of Yahuwah's blessing as they kept the feasts. The rains were the seal of blessing as they kept the feasts. This has been considered under the feast of Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles relative to rain and the harvest times. The supernatural truth of this can be seen in the fact that the assemblies and believers who fail to keep the feasts of Yahushua the right way in this supernatural context, those who fail to do it do not receive the rains of blessing and understanding, and even though immersed in Yahushua's name, will remain worldly, untrained, unprepared, unwise, and foolish, without oil when Yahushua returns. They are unwise without oil. They are not discerning the body and blood of Yahushua Messiah, who he is as Elohim, and what he did as Elohim for our deliverance. Not discerning. That's why many among you are sick and dying off your face and nuts. Left without oil when Yahushua returns. It is true that Yahushua rains his spiritual blessing on one city and not another, even as he did in Israel. The Feast of Tabernacles shows the outpouring of the set-apart Spirit on all flesh in these last days. Yahushua's people who are not entering into the process of experiencing these supernatural feasts are not receiving supernatural blessing and maturity. There is spiritual dryness, barrenness, and lack and loss of harvest. For Yahushua comes to his people as the rain, as they follow on to know him through his redemptive feast. He is the rain, the living water of the word. It washes us, it cleanses us, it overflows through us. He is the rain, not the barren, dry, cracked up, wilderness. If you want to come out of the wilderness experience of dryness, come into the harvest, the rain of his word, and knowing what it means. All nations and all the heathen were to be smitten with the plague if they refused to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. This plague was to be the punishment of Yahuwah on all nations, according to Zechariah. Plagues were the result of the broken law, the broken word. Plagues came when there was no atonement to cover the people. Whenever Israel was to be numbered before Yahuwah, all had to bring the ransom money of a shekel or a silver coin. This atonement money was to prevent the plague. No atonement money opened the way to the plagues of judgment. David experienced that. The true atonement or ransom since Yahushua is not in silver or gold though, but in the precious blood of Messiah. That is our atonement. That is how we are redeemed as a firstborn. Not through silver coin, through Yahushua's blood. Yahushua is the one who alone can prevent the plague of divine judgment on his bride. Outside of Yahushua, all mankind will come under his wrath and judgments. As the bride keeps the feast of Yahushua, Passover, Pentecost, Tabernacles, no plague shall come near their dwelling. Take this to yourself. Skin infections, afflictions, money problems, everything. Yahushua's getting our attention supernaturally right now at this time of the feast. The distinguishing characteristic upon the bells of the horses. The distinguishing characteristic upon the bells of the horses was to be set apart unto Yahuwah. That's in Zechariah 2. This was the engraving also upon the golden mitre of the high priest, set apart unto Yahuwah. Those who sacrificed to Yahuwah at his altar would do so out of the pots or bowls. All would be stamped with this inscription, set apart unto Yahuwah. No Canaanite would be there in Yahuwah's house. The language here would be very meaningful to the Israelites under the old blood covenant economy. What supernatural behavioural reality can the believer learn from these things under the old economy? What can we learn under that? What does that mean to us? Set apart unto Yahuwah. Everything was engraved with set apart unto Yahuwah. What does that mean to us? The bridal fellowship is now Yahushua's covenant house, blood sprinkled and cleansed by water, where he rests his name and fills with his esteem. The only sacrifices which Yahushua accepts now are spiritual slaughterings made acceptable by Yahushua Messiah, our great high priest. Animal sacrifices will never again be acceptable to him. The torture stake was his brazen altar. And now it's our altar where we offer up our fleshly lives, our bad habits, and burn them up as living sacrifices well-pleasing to Yahusha. The vessels in Yahusha's house are the people of Yahusha also. Remember, all the vessels in the temple had to be labeled with set apart to Yahuwah, inscribed. Well, the vessels in Yahusha's house are the people of Yahusha also. There are vessels of honor and there are vessels of dishonor. The priesthood is that of the royal priesthood of Melchizedek. And as the high priest had the engraving on his mitre set apart unto Yahuwah, so the new bride is to have the mind of Yahusha and be set apart in thought, word, and behavior. That's what the whole point of the Day of Atonement and the trumpet prior to that was for. The Day of Atonement is coming, national judgment, judging of the bride, of you, your temple, your family, your assembly. Judgment is coming. Get in line now. Stop sinning. That was the whole point of atonement, so that you can come in to the tabernacle's experience clean, matured from the encounter. The characteristic of those who experience the feast of Yahusha should indeed be set apartness and maturity. At the second coming of Messiah with his armies, all are clothed with fine white linen, which is the righteousness of the bride. The name Canaanite, remember it said no Canaanite was nowhere near the temple or inside the camp. No Canaanite was allowed in there. The name Canaanite means trafficker, and it signifies that all unset apart and filthy traffic. It signifies all unset apart and filthy traffic, like a highway or marketplace. All that traffic will cease in the house of Yahusha, as the Feast of Tabernacles is kept in sincerity, spirit, and truth. All carpetbaggers, as Yahusha did, were driven out. All the Canaanites, all the traffickers, all the ones selling their wares, all carpetbaggers must be driven out, as Yahusha did. And certainly don't listen to what they're saying. Hence, the shadows which were literal under the old blood covenant in Israel now find blessed fulfillment and divine transformation, metamorphosis through the Spirit under the new covenant bridal fellowship. So where are we up to so far? The Feast of Tabernacles is the Feast of the Esteem in the temple. That's what Haggai was talking about. The Feast of Tabernacles is the Feast of the restoration of the temple. Ezra, Haggai, Zechariah were talking about that. The Feast of Tabernacles is the Feast of set apartness unto Yahuwah. Zechariah was talking about that also. When we look at Yahusha's 3.5-year ministry, in the first Passover, he is the temple cleanser. When we look at the Gospels and we look at when Yahusha walked around, the first Passover he walked around at, he was the temple cleanser. The second time we hear about him at Passover, he is the healer of body and spirit. In the third time we hear about Passover, he is revealed as the bread of life. And of course, in the fourth Passover, he is the Lamb which takes away the sin of the world. He is the fulfiller and transformer of all typical Passover sacrifices and ceremony. Isn't that amazing? Now we're going to get somewhere really exciting. The Feast of Tabernacles and the open book. What? What's the Feast of Tabernacles got to do with the great open book? When Moses was 120 years of age and about to pass from the scene of life's responsibilities, Yahuwah commanded him to raise up the blood covenant once again with the new second generation in Israel. This was back in Deuteronomy. Who were to arise and enter into the land of promise under Joshua. In fact, most of Deuteronomy is this new book. The former generation had died in the wilderness because of unbelief. Yahuwah told Moses to write the second law in a book and deliver it to the Levites. So he'd written Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, all these things had been written down right before he died. And now he's to write all this down, summarize it all, tweak it, make it relevant for the new land they're about to go into, because it's 40 to 50 years later from when the last one had happened. So let's do it again, so this new generation will understand it. So he's told to write the second law in a book and deliver it to the Levites, the priests of Yahuwah. They were to take this book, or the book of the blood covenant, and place it in the side of the ark. They were to take this book of the law, or the book of the blood covenant, place it in the side of the ark of the blood covenant witness as a witness to them and a warning against Israel's rebellion. That's what it was for. All these stories and accounts of what happened to Israel when they rebelled, learn from it. Don't do it. The book of the law was especially the first 5 books of the scripture as written by Moses under the inspiration of the set-apart Spirit. It contained the revelation of the beginnings of the human race, Genesis, the chosen Hebrew nation and the dispersing of the Gentile nations. It contained the account of Israel's miraculous deliverance from Egypt and the failure of that first generation to enter into Canaan land. The book declared all the living words of the blood covenant with its moral, civil, and ceremonial laws. It really is the only true history book we have. Where all the Gentile nations went after they dispersed from Eden and from the garden and from the Tower of Babel, what happened? We have an account, a trustworthy account. The ordinances of Yahuwah, that's where it was told to be put. A book was told to be put in there with those things. Aaron's rod and some of the hidden manna and the tablets of stone which the commandments were on. So the book was told to be put in there. The ordinances of Yahuwah were written therein, and the grounds of Israel's approach to Yahusha, as well as the grounds on which his presence could dwell within them. Tabernacle pattern. In this book were the blessings of obedience and the curses of disobedience to the divine laws of Yahuwah. It also declared Yahuwah's purpose for the chosen nation, which was to bless all other nations. Ultimately, the Messiah Yahusha would come from this race and make deliverance available for all mankind. The priests, the Levites, were to teach the tribes of Israel the divine laws of Yahuwah. Now, the significant thing about this second book of the divine law was this. At the end of every 7 years, in the solemnity of the year of release, in the Feast of Tabernacles, the Levites were to take the book of the blood covenant out of the ark and read it to the people. So what's this? What does this mean? At the end of every 7 years, that's a Shemitah cycle, 7-year cycle. 7 of those plus 1 is the Jubilee. At the end of every 7 years, at the Feast of Tabernacles, the Levites were to take the book of the blood covenant out of the ark, this one that Moses had written, and read it to the people. This was to take place in the land of Israel, in the appointed place where Yahuwah chose to rest his name, the temple. How the book of Torah was placed in the side of the ark is not specifically stated, but the significant thing is that the book of the divine law was to be opened, read, and explained to the people in the Feast of Tabernacles. It's not mentioned in Passover or Pentecost, but in the Tabernacles. At Tabernacles, this book was to be read. It was the responsibility of the Levites and priests to teach the people Yahuwah's word. So, although there was the general teaching of the law, there was a special emphasis in the year of release, in the Feast of Tabernacles. So already we see a connection between the Feast of Tabernacles and the essential vitality of Yahusha's living words within the bride. How important is his word. In connection with all this may be added the instruction given for kings, as written in Deuteronomy 17. When the new king sat on his throne, he was to write for himself a copy of the book of the divine law out of that which was before the priests, the Levites. This Torah book was to be in the throne of his kingdom, and he was commanded to read it, meditate in it day and night, and then do it, behave it. Thus there was the book of the divine law in the side of the ark of the blood covenant, which, as we know, the ark of the blood covenant is the throne of Yahuwah, the throne of the divine King Yahuwah in the earth. That was his throne, a symbol of it. There was a book there. Then there was a book of the law in the throne of Israel's earthly king. The king was to read his copy of the book continually. The Levites were to read the copy of the book, which was in the side of the ark, every 7 years in the special assembly to all Israel in the Feast of Tabernacles. End of the year. In applying this, let's apply this to us. In applying this to Yahushua's new blood covenant bridal fellowship, today we have the account of John's vision in Revelation 4-5, where he was caught up in the Spirit and saw a throne set in heaven. One was seated upon the throne, and in his hand there was a 7-sealed scroll, a book. Here's another book. John wept much because none was found worthy to open the book and loose the 7 seals therein. However, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Lamb, was found worthy. He took the book out of the hand of him who sat on the throne and broke the seals thereof. This book is the book of redemption, the book that only the kinsman redeemer can open. Yahushua, who was an image, this was a symbol, an image of a lamb. It's all about imagery. In it we behold the consummation of Yahushua's purposes in the earth. In it, in this open book, open scroll, which Yahushua is only able to open, in it we behold the consummation of Yahushua's purposes in the earth. And in the completion of all time, this book of Yahushua will be opened to the bride as they mature and come into their full inheritance with their deliverer. So as we become into our maturity and our minds are washed clean, we are able to understand what the open book, what the words of Scripture actually mean. It's abstract, it's always ongoing, you never get to the end of it. This book which John saw was in the throne of the King of the universe. Not just the throne of the Ark of the Blood, not just the throne of the earthly King of it. This book was in the throne of the King of the universe. He who is the King of kings and Master of masters brings revelation and illumination to John, who shadows the ministry to the people of Yahushua. How amazing is this? Thus we may say that as the bridal fellowship experiences the Feast of Tabernacles, if she'll get there, come on, stop camping around Passover, get on through the feasts. As the bridal fellowship experiences the Feast of Tabernacles and comes to maturity, increased light, increased understanding will be her portion. Thank Yahushua for the truths of Passover and of Pentecost. But in the Feast of Tabernacles, full and complete truth will break forth on the bridal assembly. The Feast of Tabernacles is the Feast of the open book. The Feast of Tabernacles is the Feast of the open book. He's opening up the scrolls. He's opening, revealing, sharing the secrets of the parables to us. Yeah? Those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. The bride must teach the living word of Yahushua to the people of Yahushua, to feed his sheep. It's another reason for the assembly, to feed one another. And although there's a general teaching of his word, it's evident that tabernacles will bring a special emphasis and illumination in the opened book, the living word. So, the time of tabernacles and every feast or gathering really is a perfect opportunity to open the book of Yahushua's living words, once incomplete in Daniel, but finished by John in Revelation. The living words, always bring in the living words and teach the people how they should live and behave today. Yahushua's word is the tree of life. If we're in his word, we are partaking of the tree of life. If you have his spirit within you, if you are behaving, becoming cleansed and going through the experiential fulfillment of the feasts. Now I want to finish with this outpouring of the water, which we hinted at the beginning. Outpouring of the water. Speaking about the open book and the word, living water, let's talk about the outpouring of the water. The Feast of Tabernacles was commanded by Yahuwah under the law of Moses. However, in the times of Yahushua, There were some extra traditional Jewish festivals added. I bet there were. Probably hundreds of them. With regard to the Feast of Tabernacles, there were certain additions like the Feast of the Outpouring of the Waters, which centre around the Feast of the 7th month, Tabernacles. The behaviour of Yahushua at this feast surely has some great significance for the bridal fellowship today. What is this Feast of the Outpouring of the Water at Tabernacles time? What's that all about? On the first day of the Feast of Tabernacles, according to the law of Moses, the people were to take branches of trees and rejoice before Yahuwah. Then they were to build booths or tents out of them and dwell in them for 7 days of the feast. This was in commemoration of the time when they dwelt in booths after the exodus of the nation from Egypt. They were not to live in houses during this period of time. On the 14th day, the pilgrims had arrived at Jerusalem. The tabernacle tents had been made on the roofs, in the courtyards, in the streets, and in public squares, as well as along the roads and in the gardens. All this was done within a Sabbath day's journey. Now all were prepared to commence the week of festivities. It seems as if the branches cut down at the entry of Messiah into Jerusalem allude to this feast also. All these branches here. Now we come to one of the most exciting parts of the feast as far as the Jews were concerned. Although not commanded under the law of Moses, the Jews had other ceremonials added to the feast. They'd added stuff. In this case, there's nothing wrong with what they added to remember it by. But let's see what Yahushua did. On the first day of the feast, there was the custom of the drawing out of the water. You can see him doing it here. The custom was that the altar was cleansed in the night watches. Then the gates of the temple were thrown open at midnight. While the morning sacrifice was being prepared, a priest, accompanied by a joyous procession with music, went down to the pool of Siloam, see here, where he drew water into a golden pitcher. At the same time that the procession started for Siloam, another went to a place at the Kidron Valley, where they brought branches, which, amidst the blast of the priest's trumpets, were stuck in either side of the altar above the burnt offering, bending them over towards it so as to form a canopy. The rest of the ceremony involved the outpouring of wine and the outpouring of the waters at Siloam. So it's incorporating all the harvesty type stuff. The temple music began and Psalms 113 to 118 were sung. In the course of the singing, the worshippers shook their branches towards the altar. See all this stuff happening? This is how they did it in Yahushua's day. They'd taken the feasts as commanded by Moses and elaborated on it all to make it grander with much pomp and ceremony. This apparently was done over the 7 days of the feast. Then on the 7th day, or the last day of the feast, the priests circuited the altar 7 times. What does that remind you of? The fall of the walls of Jericho. They circuited the altar 7 times, remembering the fall of the walls of Jericho after the 7 times march amidst trumpet blasts, and poured out the waters from Siloam for the last time. It is at this significant moment, as the people were watching the outpouring of the waters and all it symbolized in the Jewish mind, so picture yourself there, amidst great anticipation, you could probably hear a pin drop. This was the final water being poured for the year. Right then, it was when Yahushua stood up and cried out the word of John 7, "Anyone who believes in me, as the scripture has said, then out of his belly shall gush rivers of living waters." You think that water's impressive? You're also impressed by this pomp and ceremony? You think that water's so impressive? Well, anyone who believes in me, as the scripture has said, then out of his innermost being, out of his belly, shall gush rivers of living water. In the last day, that great day of the feast, Yahushua stood and cried this out. This day was the 21st day, the day of the great Hosanna, or the day of the willows, as many called it. He spoke of the rivers of the Spirit that would flow from the innermost being of those who would believe in him. The symbol is interpreted for us by Yahushua himself. We know what this all means. The river of water symbolized the set-apart Spirit, which was to be poured out when Yahushua was risen and esteemed. The Jews counted the outpouring of the wine and the outpouring of the waters at Siloam as symbolic of the coming outpouring of the Spirit when Messiah came. That's what they were doing it for, as a shadow, as a symbol of Messiah coming, of their deliverer, great deliverer coming to rescue them and deliver them. And yet who was standing amongst them? Who do they want to kill? The Feast of Tabernacles was also the outpouring of rain. The Jews counted this as symbolic of the set-apart Spirit being outpoured under Messiah upon Israel and the Gentile nations also. So, it may be asked, how many Jews saw that the Feast of Tabernacles, with its ceremonies, sacrifices, festivities, and outpouring, was all to be fulfilled in and by Messiah Yahushua himself, who stood in their midst? How many saw that? No, they're just going about the shadows, and their own added bits and pieces to it as well. Just like the religious folk today, Jews and Christians and Messianics and Nazim, just going about the shadows with your eyes closed, head stuck in the sand. Who actually knew that Yahushua's in their midst? If you'll come together and experience him. He was the true Siloam, the sent one. He was the sacrifice for sin, and the torture stake would be his altar. Isn't that an amazing photo? He's the high priest. On his name is set apart to Yahuwah. Look, he is. That's where he was sacrificed. Upon the basis of his shed blood, the waters of the Spirit would be poured out, even as it was upon the basis of a smitten rock that the waters flowed for Israel to drink. And when Moses just whacked the rock, the believing and the thirsting would come to him and drink. Ordinarily, Yahushua should have been arrested by the temple officers for breaking into the service like this. But never a man spoke like this, and the officers feared to do anything about him. It is worthy to note that Yahushua spoke these things concerning the rivers of the Spirit during the Feast of Tabernacles. So let's tie all this up. This is all happening at the Feast of Tabernacles. Not the Feast of Pentecost or Passover. Although the passage is often used relative to the Spirit-filling experience of Pentecost, the rivers of living water. Although it's used to refer to Pentecost at times, it finds its ultimate fullness in the tabernacle's outpouring fullness of the Spirit, the living reign of Yahuwah on his bride. So you can have a Spirit infilling a seed planted within you at Pentecost. You can be a little bit further along the path experiencing than you were at Passover. But if you're not coming into the maturity, into the listening to the trumpet voice of Yahushua, getting you to prepare and to get pure and stop sinning and become mature and follow him, because judgment is here and he's purging and cleansing his bride, cleansing her so that he can dwell amongst her at tabernacles. If you're not having this experience, you're not flowing in the Spirit. You're not activating that Spirit. The seed will grow dormant and die. You're not experiencing the living rain, the rivers of living water coming through you. So, outpouring of the Spirit on the living rain of Yahushua on his bride. So in summary, we see Yahushua going to the Feast of Tabernacles in secret, not openly. He went to that feast secretly, the one at Shalom. It speaks of the secret coming of Messiah to his temple in the feast. It speaks of him doing secret things, abstract parables, which is opening the book to us now, isn't he? Opening the interpretations to his bride, those who are willing to go his way. What else do we see? Yahushua going into the temple about the midst of the feast and teaching the divine words. Those that do the Father's will shall know the mind and words, whether it is of Yahuwah or of man. That's what he said. Yahushua prophesying also of the rivers of the Spirit to be outpoured as he taught on the last day of the feast. It should be remembered, here we go, this is tying it together from the prophets. It should be remembered that this was the very same day which Haggai had spoken his prophecy concerning the esteem of the later house being greater than the former. I'm saying that as later because it makes more sense to us. Latter, Sounds a bit religious, doesn't it? Sounds like an old church movement. Esteem of the later house, not the former house, the later house. The esteem. Remember Haggai said that? The esteem of the later house being created would be greater than the former, as he also stood in the temple. So Yahushua stood there saying this about rivers of living water. And 1,000 odd years before that, Haggai said it in the new temple. See the shadows, the fulfillments? As the newly formed bridal fellowship corporately experiences this feast, corporately, where two or more are gathered, I'm there. As the new formed bride experiences this feast, Yahushua will come to his people in a new supernatural way. There will be an increased insight into his teachings, and there will be a mighty flow of the river of his spirit from the bridal fellowship, his living temple. We are living witnesses of that happening this year. Yahushua is getting his attention, the bride's attention, I should say. Yahushua is getting the attention of his bride about who he really is. He is Yahushua, the only Elohim. I am one. Yeah? And he wants us to follow him through this experience of the feasts. So, let's finish with this insanity here, the modern festivals that we see today. We've done other videos about this, so I'll skim through. You can see they're having competitions all over the world. Sukkah City. Look, they're making, who's going to build the best sukkah? It's an architectural phenomenon. People are turning it into a circus. Look at it. Considering the modern Jewish festivals, all may be summarized by two observations. First, ceremonies that all pertain to the letter and ritual of the divine laws are empty. All ceremonies pertaining to the letter and ritual of the divine law are empty and vain, apart from the heart transformative, freshly abstract and beautiful reality in Messiah Yahushua. Why do you think he interrupted that water ceremony they were doing? Because if he had any respect for it, he would have been into it, wouldn't he? Respecting it, observing it. He had no respect for it because of the people involved. They couldn't even see who he was. So he opened up his mouth and interrupted them at the most solemn part of the ceremony. It's all empty and vain if Yahushua's not in there transforming. Jewish history becomes a real warning and example of that which has happened in bridal fellowship history also. It shows how one may hold to, pay attention to this, it shows us that one may hold to and observe the shadow, the type, the promise, the prophecy, and never come to the life, never come to the substance, the supernatural fulfillment of maturity. You can be a bloody scholar of all the promise, prophecy, shadow, and type, and never come to the life, supernatural fulfillment. Therefore, you never mature. It is sadly very possible to know the letter of the law inside and out, to know that which kills, and miss the spirit which gives the life and breathes the life into those very same laws and instructions. Of course, giving us the love and desire to want to obey them, all through the new covenant reality of love. It's all about love. The second major observation is that Yahushua desires all of his people to enter in and enjoy the abstract, fresh, supernatural realities in all three feasts. In Solomon's reign, Israel kept the three feasts in the year. The three feasts speak of the fullness of Yahushua in his bridal assembly, which all believers may enjoy. The bridal fellowship is living in the last of the last days, when the feasts will be entered into properly and not through dead ritual programming, not through lifeless murmurings and shofar blasts from a crowd that don't even enter into the throne room or even know the one who sits therein. They don't know. They don't care. They just want to keep their religion going, their power, position, pleasure going. None need to stay at any one feast, but all may, if they will, all may follow Yahushua's example and experience all the redemptive feasts through the privilege, blessing, and victory of our wonderful King, gathering in anticipation at each appointed time in sincerity and truth, with no rehearsed plan, no liturgy or shadow props. Just food, wine, and plenty of loving. That's all you need. Come together in sincerity and truth. Therefore, let us keep the feasts in the behaviour of sincerity and truth. So, brothers and sisters, that's long enough. That's the completion of our Tabernacle series, Supernatural Feasts. And like I said, I will do 3 or 4 more videos in a few months when it comes closer to Passover and Pentecost time. So then we'll have this series complete. So these are the feasts. There's 7 feast times a year. 3 feast times, 7 high Sabbaths. 3 feast times, Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. But there are 7 high Sabbaths in that time there. So we can see, don't get caught up on the shadows. Study the word. All the old covenant, the commandments, everything are valid. We need them to know what we're supposed to do and mainly what we're not supposed to do. Israel is a living witness of what not to do. The first bride was divorced. And now she is fulfilled in everything that the bridal assembly is becoming. Don't get caught up in the traditions. They are useless. You have Yahushua's Spirit. All these traditions are covered by Yahushua's Spirit. He is the reminder. You don't need a Seder, formal tradition. You don't need bread and wine. That is him. You don't need music festivals. You don't need to blow trumpets. That's his voice in your head. You don't need to fast from food. He's judging you. Mate, forcing us to put the sin off. Building sukkahs. He's inside you. Living in tents. All these silly things. Tzitzits and bells and candles and prayer books and communion. All this nonsense. It's all covered in Yahushua. He is finishing the job that he started in his bride. He is fulfilling them. To do the fulfillment means you can see what's being accomplished, the completion. So go through this chart in your own time again. I've got them posted on the Behavior Evolution Facebook page. If you really want a super duper high quality version, just email me. I'll email you a full digital copy version one. Everything here is free. It's all for the body, to uplift her. If you want to stick one of these in your office to remind you what to come into the feasts and know. By the time I put this video out, we will have probably already done the first feast of Tabernacles, which was our body is the temple. That's what you need to know. If you're a newbie, don't know all the theory or the shadows very well, probably easy for you actually if you don't know the shadows. Less nonsense to come out of. Last day of the redemptive year feast is great joy and celebration in Yahushua. And that's why he stood up at that time and went, anyone who believes in me, rivers of living water will gush from their innermost beings. You can have the marriage crown of celebration and life for the overcomer. If you want to experience this, overcome. So I encourage you to have this stuck up somewhere because it reminds you of the process, the supernatural redemptive experience. Because otherwise, all the carpetbaggers and preachers, teachers, pastors, rabbis, whack jobs out there, just teaching all this stuff with their own slant on it. That stuff's great, but you need the supernatural experience. All right? We've been going for an hour now. These feasts are part of our redemption training, so the appointed times must be observed, just like the weekly Sabbath. Yes, we're coming into a few sermons about Paul in Hebrews about the rest that you can experience in Yahushua. Great rest that surpasses any Sabbath day. That doesn't mean there's not a 7-day cycle. Doesn't mean, and he lived that himself in creation and in the wilderness. He taught them rest on the 7th day. So we still do that. If emergencies come up, you don't have to be afraid of being struck down. No, do what you need to do. But if you can, best you can, rest on the 7th day, all right? So we observe the appointed times. Take the day off work. Some of my sons couldn't get it together this year. And so I just said to them, look, as soon as we find out the feast dates for next year, if you want to know what they are, generally the general Jewish calendar, Orthodox Jewish calendar, they have the dates generally pretty well organized. But when we know for sure, we'll give you the dates, we'll put them on our website, mark them on your calendar, all right? We'll do it better. Each year we do them, we get better at it, all right? Don't do them simply blindly doing the shadow teachings, but we must study, listen, and ask Yahushua to reveal to us personally what each shadow experience means to achieve what truth it teaches us today in the reality of our own family, our own fellowship. It's got to be a personal, localized reality. What are you getting my attention about this year? So we can follow him and be matured. The whole purpose for Tabernacles is to look back at Passover, the blood, what it's doing within us, cleansing us, the word of your witness, surging us forward. Follow Yahushua, be matured, metamorphed through each feast to become a trustworthy, faithful servant, a witness and an image of him. Got it, guys? Thoroughly enjoyed going through this, and it won't be the last we talk about these feasts because it's becoming ingrained within the foundational truths Yahushua's giving us here at the Behavior Revolution. Not only about the fact that Yahuwah metamorphed into Yahushua for our deliverance. He is Elohim now. There's only one. It's Yahushua. He is seated on the throne. He will be coming back with his armies. There's not a father and a son. It's Yahushua. So understand that, and it'll just surge you forward, fast track you in your experience. Love you guys. That's long enough now. Enjoy the feasts, and we'll do more videos very shortly. Bye-bye.
Bubbly, 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 bubbly. Make the trumpets blow.
Estaba la paellera agarrada, entremetida entre las piedras de Chipiona, del paro. Y cuando entro en el restaurante me ve el cocinero con una paellera que a veces la vende paellera. ¡Asómate, mira dónde llega el agua!
Man, no stop watch when you bubbly, bubbly. Serious thing, it and a comedy, comedy. And them say you have the comedy, comedy. So me won't get someone come trouble, trouble. Bust two buckle of the bubbly, bubbly. Call in two friend and then double, double. Girl so hot, she a bubbly, bubbly. And she know when she got, she a carry me remedy. Body look good, girl, you ever be winning it. Turn it up right, girl, you never be dimming it. Take up your body, cause you're in your element. Pon your body, me take up a permanent residence.
With the final blast, the ups and downs of a really long day come to a full stop. It's chow time. Time to eat as Jews gather together for break the fast.
Make the trumpets blow.
Jews around the world celebrate the holiday of Passover, or Pesach, a commemoration of the biblical story of a ritual feast on the first night of Passover spent around the table, retelling and reflecting on the story of the Israelites' salvation from slavery in Egypt, with prayers, songs, food, and lots of wine. But no two Seders are exactly alike.
It's time for the matzah feast. It's time for the matzah feast. Ain't got no raisin yeast. Ain't got no raisin yeast. Gonna dip some parsley. Gonna dip it twice to see. Cause you know that he split the sea and he set my people free. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Here to talk about wines for the Seder.
Exactly.
And I'm here with
Pesach is coming.
I'm here with my good friend Gabe.
We're going to drink a lot of wine. That's one of the big, mitzvot of Pesach, of the Pesach Seder, is to drink those 4 cups of wine. So it's a lot of wine. You don't want something that's too heavy. So I decided to choose here to start with rosé, which is pretty lighter in alcohol also than most other dry wines.
Why is this distilled product kosher for Pesach?
Okay, so that's a great question, Jay. Cognac is a grape brand. It's distilled from grapes. Because it's distilled, the halacha is that you make a she'akol. You don't, the bracha, the blessing on cognac is she'akol. It's not borei pri hagafen.
You know what has a nice, sweet, almost caramel aroma?
And you should know that Lurie Royem is one of the most famous, one of the most prestigious cognac houses in France.
Well, L'chaim,
L'chaim,
this has been
enjoy.
actually a lot of fun.
Always a lot of fun with you.
A bit of a free-for-all. Before the singing starts, guests pass around large green onions and whack each other with the stems. In case you were wondering, why?
I cleaned the house and got rid of the chametz. Now the Seder's where I go. Me and my fam at the table eating matzah like the Hebrews long ago. So come over, we start Passover Seder by blessing the wine, and we washing our hands. Then we grab the parsley, dip it in the salt water, and break the middle matzah in half.
And now singing like, girl, you know I want matzah. Matzah was handmade by my father before me. Thanking God that we were freed, let out of slavery in Mitzrayim. Say, boys, now we'll drink 4 cups, spill for the plates, and go on with the magid. Thanking God that we were freed, thanking God that we were freed.
Feeling love from my Seder crew. Gonna rock out the Dayenu. Chagad Yala and Nadiru. Next year in Yerushalayim. Tonight family fills the room, and the kitchen smells like soup. For 8 days we're saying thank you to God who took us out of Mitzrayim. He took us out of Mitzrayim. For 8 days we're saying thank you to God who took us out of Mitzrayim.
Should again before the meal can begin and eat the matzah our fathers ate. They had to leave swiftly, no time to add yeast. Now we've got unleavened bread on the plate. Take a bite of the maror so we remember the horrors of our lives as Egyptian slaves. And for roasted to that we put it on matzah and then eat Hillel sandwich, then Shulchan Aruch.
And we're singing like, girl, you know I want matzah. Matzah was handmade by my father before me. Thanking God that we were freed, let out of slavery in Mitzrayim. Say, boys, now we'll drink 4 cups, spit for the plates, and go on with the magid. Thanking God that we were freed, thanking God that we were freed. Dayenu.
Feeling love from the Seder crew. Gonna rock out the Dayenu. Chagad Yala and Nadiru. Next year in Yerushalayim. Tonight family fills the room, and the kitchen smells like soup. For 8 days we're saying thank you to God who took us out of Mitzrayim. He took us out of Mitzrayim. He took us out of Mitzrayim. He took us out of Mitzrayim. Dayenu and Chagad Yah and Nadiru. I'm feeling love from my Seder crew. Come on to the Seder. Come on to the Seder.
¡Hay que hacerlo ahora! ¡Con los dos manos de ¡Ya va, Sevilla! ¡Ya va, Sevilla!
Come on to the Seder, come on. I'm feeling love from the Seder crew. Gonna rock at the Dayenu. Chagad Yah and Nadiru. Next year in Yerushalayim. shit smells like stew. For 8 days we're saying thank you to God who took us out of Mitzrayim. 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 I'm feeling love from a Seder crew.
That cracks me up.